This is Michael Popok, Legal AF, with some breaking news and an update in the Trump Organization criminal trial being prosecuted by the Manhattan DA's office, which goes into the first day of deliberation on Monday, December 5th, after closing arguments. It was a bit of a skirmish that broke out on closing arguments this past Friday between the Manhattan DA's office and the lawyers representing Donald Trump. Recall that the Trump Organization, but not Donald Trump himself nor his children, is being prosecuted for 15 counts of tax evasion, and the lead cooperating witness, the bride at the wedding, the body at the funeral, was the longtime CFO Alan Weisselberg, along with the controller of the Trump Organization and the former CEO Matt Calamari. All of those people testified in a way that was very effective for the prosecutors that the benefits that were given to key executives like Alan Weisselberg, such as a free apartment in Manhattan and free rent, free school tuition for children and grandchildren, free limousine and car services throughout the year on a daily basis, added up to income that should have been reported and taxes paid on it, both by the company and by the individual receiving the benefit. None of that was done over 15 years by the Trump Organization to the benefit of its executives and to the benefit of the Trump Organization, because nobody reported those benefits, those bennies, as income, so no taxes were paid. Yet the Trump Organization was able to take it as a business deduction on their tax return, lowering their taxes, and there was no capture on the other side of individual tax payments paid either by the Trump Organization or by the executives for the benefits that they received. That is the basis of the lawsuit. So what happened at the close of final argument? Josh Steinglass for the prosecutor's office on Friday and the prosecution team decided, after listening to the defense theories of the case and their defenses for the last several weeks, believed that they needed in front of the jury to make it clear that the highest level of executives at the Trump Organization, including Donald Trump himself, were aware, must have been aware of the fraud. Why did Josh Steinglass and the prosecution team feel they needed to do that? But because throughout the trial, the defense team argued through their witnesses that this was just a couple of rogue employees outside of the knowledge of the company who decided to benefit themselves with these payments and take them off the books, right, under the table, and not report them on their taxes. And this was just a case of a few executives who lined their pockets, and their employer, the Trump Organization, and the payroll entity owned by Trump, had no knowledge of it. Well, having hit that bell over and over again in front of the jury, the prosecution obviously felt that they had been hurt a bit or needed to rehabilitate their case a bit in front of the jury in closing. And so they pulled out documents with Donald Trump's name on it and said that it can be no argument to the jury that the Trump senior executives, the children and Donald Trump Jr., were blissfully ignorant about what was going on for years and years and years by their executives, if the jury is buying this argument at all. However, by pushing so hard against Donald Trump, who was not a defendant in the case and is not listed as a co-conspirator in the case, the defense got all hot and bothered and attempted to make a motion for mistrial, made a motion for mistrial on Friday, arguing that the prosecution had gone too far. So once the jury was dismissed from the room so that they wouldn't be negatively impacted by the argument by lawyers, the lawyers for Donald Trump's, for the Trump Organization argued that the prosecution went too far. Donald Trump's not a defendant on the stand. He hasn't been criminally charged. Neither have his children. And the suggestion that the prosecutor is making that there was knowledge at the highest level is a bridge too far in the defense's view, and it leads to a mistrial. Judge Merchan, who's presiding over the case, heard argument and heard the rationale from the prosecutors as to why they believed they needed to bring in the evidence that had already been produced and admitted into evidence during the trial about Trump's knowledge, because they believed that the defense had leaned too hard in the other direction, arguing that this was a lone wolf single gunman type theory like the Kennedy assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and therefore the prosecution said, well, they opened the door, and now we're able to argue that there was knowledge at the highest levels, including Donald Trump, and allowed them to flash a piece of evidence that had Donald Trump's name on it to show that he knew about the fraud. Judge Merchan agreed with the prosecution, said, I don't really want you to go any further in your closings. So when we return from the motion for mistrial, you'll continue your closings, prosecution, and then the defense will close, and they rested. So it was ultimately much ado about nothing, but for a moment there, the trial hung in the balance as the defense argued for a mistrial. Now, as a trial lawyer, let me tell you, if you're arguing for a mistrial, you probably don't think the case is going that well for you, because if you like the results, you'd probably roll the dice and say, let's wait for the jury. Remember, all of these lawyers are in the room. All of them are watching intently the jury for any body language, any tea leaf they can read to decide whether they're buying anything that these lawyers are selling or anything that the witnesses are testifying about. The defense, I presume, thinks it's not going well for them and is trying to get a do-over by moving for a mistrial. And Judge Merchan was having none of it and decided that nothing that had happened in the courtroom was reversible error or gave the defense grounds for a mistrial, leading to a deliberation on the case that will start on Monday. Now, I'm not expecting a verdict on Monday because I think it's going to take at least a day or a day and a half, but we could have a verdict as early as the December the 5th in this case. And if it's a fast verdict, I believe that signals, if the jury comes back quickly, we get a note during the day that the jury is ready to render its verdict. That's probably terrible for the Trump organization, because I think that if they're sorting out the evidence, and there was only 2 major witnesses called by the prosecution and only a couple that were, called by the defense. There's not that much testimony that has to be re-reviewed by the jury. But if they're coming back quickly, I think that's a verdict against, a guilty verdict against the Trump organization. Whether it's on all 15 counts, I don't know. But I think that's what's going to happen. And then if that happens, and we'll know by Monday, Tuesday, the verdict, and it's against the Trump organization, of course, look for an appeal process that will push out the ultimate rendering of the verdict in this case, or the after appeal, at least 6 months to a year through the, it'll go through 2 levels of appeal in New York. The first department, which is the first level of appellate court that sits over Manhattan, would get it first. And whoever didn't like the result there would then try to take an appeal to the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court of New York State. We don't use Supreme Court as the highest level appellate court in New York. That's reserved for the trial court level, which is where the case is presently in front of the jury. So we will be watching this closely for a verdict potentially tomorrow, Monday, December 5th, sometime late in the day. Could push off into Tuesday. I don't think it goes beyond midweek, and then we'll do the full reporting at the midweek edition of Legal AF. And of course, on the weekend wrap-up edition of Legal AF. This is Michael Popok reporting on the Trump Organization, criminal prosecution, and deliberations that start in just 24 hours.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.